for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Medila Zanko, and I'm the founder of For Her North Dakota. We are an organization based here primarily working with victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. How many in the room tonight have heard of sexual exploitation and trafficking in this country, in North Dakota? The average age of entry into sexual exploitation and trafficking is anywhere between the ages of 12 to 14 years old, but right now we're actually seeing it lessen to the age of between 11 and 12 years old. Pretty shocking here in America. And so whenever I get to speak to a crowd like this of young people who are here with their parents, I get really excited because prevention is key to ending the reality of sex trafficking in our world. And if I can provide you guys with ways to keep yourself safe, ways to identify your vulnerability strictly based on your age, and then how to respond or how to combat trafficking in your community, then I feel like I've done a really good job. I work with victims of sex trafficking and have for the last 6 years. The youngest victim I've ever worked with was 11 years old, out of Florida, and all the way up into the 30s. I'm not going to share too much about my own personal story. There's lots of news articles out there. You guys can do your research on my background, my bio, what kind of qualifies me to do this work. Part of why I'm passionate about this work is because I am a survivor of sex trafficking. At the age of 13 years old, the vulnerabilities in my life at that time where I came from a broken home, I had suffered some abuse, and started running away at a really, really young age, and that left me vulnerable. One of the statistics I want to share with you, because even though you guys are good church-going people and love the Lord, the reality is that kids sometimes run away from home, and that leaves them extremely vulnerable. The statistic is right now that within the first 42 hours, a runaway, 2 out of every 3 runaways will be approached by a sexual predator. That doesn't necessarily mean that person's going to be a trafficker, but it will definitely be somebody that's going to prey upon the vulnerability of a runaway. So that's what led me to be really, really vulnerable at the age of 13. Turned to a friend in school who offered me a safe place to stay, who was under the control of an older boyfriend who was selling her at the time, and her job was to go to school and recruit other girls for him to sell. And that's what happened to me at 13 years old. And that just led me into a really long life of cycles and patterns of sexual exploitation and self-harm and really bad choices. And at 32 years old, I had a radical encounter with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And he saved my life and he set me free. He began the healing process. And I never thought in a million years that I would be getting up speaking publicly about not only what had happened to me as a child, but my life as a result of that. But God had another plan, because it's through my voice that you guys can be protected. I started working with at-risk kids at a youth group, still not talking about the things that I had really experienced as a young person. And then as I was working with these kids, especially the young girls, I started to hear them describe my life. You know, like they were telling me my story, that they were experiencing some of the things that I had experienced, with one key difference. I was raised in the 80s. Way back then, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, you know, we didn't have the technology that we have today. And so the alarming information that I was receiving about how these girls were being lured into very unsafe relationships online, very dangerous activity online was very, very, very concerning to me. And it was then in order to help them that I started looking up, this thing that was going on called sexting, and girls and boys taking sexual pictures of themselves and sharing them back and forth. And I had some girls that had gone to high school parties and given something to drink, blacked out, woke up, knew that they had been sexually violated, but had no recall of what had happened to them, and it just broke my heart. The stories these young 12, 13, 14-year-old girls were telling me, and so I started to do my research, and I started to learn about sex trafficking. And then as I was learning myself about sex trafficking here in America, because I was like most of you, where I just thought it was something that went on overseas, in India and Asia and so forth. I didn't realize that it was an issue, and I certainly didn't realize that it was an issue back in the 80s, and that it had gotten so incredibly worse here in the year now 2015 due to the internet. It's estimated that we have over 27 million slaves today in the world. Here in America, 300 to 500,000 children are at risk for being lured into the sex trade. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so as I started reading these statistics and wanting to help these girls, I discovered, oh my gosh, what happened to me at 13 years old wasn't just a really messed up situation. I was actually traded for money, bought that night at a party. That's sex trafficking. There was an exchange for my body for money against my consent, sex trafficking. So I became really on fire and passionate about it, and thus began my work, and now I'm considered an expert in the nation on the issue of sex trafficking, primarily working with minors who are victims. Like I was saying, one of the important things and key things here is education and awareness. And I'm really passionate about that, so I'm excited that I've gotten to come tonight to share with you guys. We are going to, because I think one of the best ways for you guys to learn, this is a really overwhelming topic, and I asked your pastor if I had freedom to speak boldly about the issue and not stick our head in the sand, because the more you know, the more you'll be able to keep yourself safe, and the more you'll be able to keep your friends safe. And it takes a collaborative effort. It takes you guys looking out for you, and you guys looking out for your friends. And I work with an organization called Shared Hope International. It's a pretty big worldwide organization, and they made an incredible tool called Chosen, which is shown around the country in schools and at youth groups. They're a faith-based organization, and they've made a short awareness film that I'm going to share with you guys tonight. And then I thought one of the best ways, for you guys to learn and for me to know where you're at in the community as far as what you need to, fight this, because it is going on here in North Dakota. It's going on here in Bismarck. I've been here for a year now, working primarily on the issue and topic of sex trafficking, and I've worked with over 20 victims in just one short year, ranging anywhere from girls at risk to girls who are fully involved in the sex trade, either through pornography, stripping, or prostitution. So I'm going to go ahead and show the clip. It's called Chosen. It's by Shared Hope International. And then I'll talk a little bit more, and then open it up for discussion. You're going to hear some hard stuff, some true life stories from girls that I'm actually friends with. I'm part of a national survivor network, and there's hundreds of us who have survived sexual trafficking and exploitation. We get together, and we're a big group of survivors, and some of us have gone on to be doctors and lawyers after healing and going into a good program and learning that our value and worth does not rely on how much our body can be sold for, but the gifts that God gave us and the purpose that He designed us for. Um, some of the women have gone on to run programs like myself. Others have gone on to be incredible wives and mothers, and it happens to boys too. I want you boys right now to know. It does not just happen to girls. There's a huge, large amount of growing information proving that the sexual exploitation and trafficking of boys exists here in the United States as well. But then you guys have another thing to be concerned about, is that men make up, this is just a hard cold fact, men make up the demand. And you guys, I think, are smart enough in your age group to understand supply and demand. If there's a demand, then there needs to be a supply. And so if people are buying bodies for sex or labor, then there's going to be a supply. And your age makes you vulnerable above and beyond anything else. So I want you guys to rid your mind right now of any stereotypes. Like, if I say pimp, who automatically gets like the picture of Snoop Dogg in their head, or, you know, yeah, like, he's played one in some movies, and I think he even confessed publicly in an article that he was proud of being a pimp at one time. And so we kind of get this like stereotypical idea and picture of what a pimp, because a pimp is a trafficker, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, of what they look like. But I'm here to tell you right now that the people that I was involved with when I was a teenager were not Snoop Dogg material. They didn't look anything like that. They didn't act anything like that. A lot of the girls that I work with, traffickers can be parents. They can be anybody really in your community. The buyers can be anybody in your community. So any stereotype that you have about what a trafficker may look like, wipe that out of your head. And then also too, when we're thinking about a trafficking victim, oftentimes we will call them just prostitutes, that these are prostitutes that are selling their bodies for money. Oftentimes there's a misconception that these girls, women choose this lifestyle, which I'm here to tell you that less than 90 or more than 90% of the women caught in the life of prostitution are doing it by choice, and most of them were introduced to it as children. And almost 100% of them had suffered previous sexual childhood abuse across the board. Leaves them completely open and vulnerable to that exploitation. I worked with low-income girls from single-parent family homes, girls of color, girls from impoverished neighborhoods. That is definitely a vulnerability in some circumstances. But I have also worked with girls who are white, upper middle class, two-parent family homes, raised in the church, homeschooled, saving their virginity for marriage. I have worked with girls who have been lured in to trafficking who fit that description as well. And so there is no stereotype of what a girl looks like that could be trafficked, or what a boy looks like that could be trafficked. And so I just want you to, kind of take that thing off of you that says, well, this is a really sad thing, but it could never happen in my family. It could never happen in my neighborhood and not in my church. And I'm here to tell you, yes, it can. It really, really can. It's happening everywhere. It's a $32 billion business right now in the United States. When I started doing this work, organized crime, and I think you guys are mature enough to understand this, right? We've got drugs and we've got running of arms and guns, but the selling of bodies was at number 3 6 years ago, and now it's pretty neck and neck with number 1, which is drugs. So for right now, the battle is fighting it, and we're winning the war, but it's a slow go right now. And through education and awareness, getting your age group on fire for not only protecting yourself, but becoming modern day abolitionists who say absolutely no human is to be bought or sold in my generation, is a way to get you guys empowered to be a voice, to say no, it stops now in this generation. As I look back, I have a little pamphlet that's going to be available for you guys to take home, and it's called Red Flags. And it's how to identify a pimp and trafficker, and then how to identify a victim. I exhibited almost every single red flag that you could have as somebody who was vulnerable and involved in a very unsafe relationship and situation at 13 years old. And if somebody would have identified me, if somebody would have been able to go to a teacher or the police or my mom or somebody and say, hey, something's not right here, I might have really been saved from a lot of really bad stuff that happened to me growing up. And so that's why education and awareness for me is so important. So that if you have those vulnerabilities, or if you've experienced some things, we want to create a safe place and an educated place for you to step forward and talk about it. Going back to why I do this work is because I look back now, around the time that I started running away and even prior to that. I have a little pamphlet that's going to be available for you guys to take home, and it's called Red Flags. And it's how to identify a pimp and trafficker, and then how to identify a victim. I exhibited almost every single red flag that you could have as somebody who was vulnerable and involved in a very unsafe relationship and situation at 13 years old. And if somebody would have identified me, if somebody would have been able to go to a teacher or the police or my mom or somebody and say, hey, something's not right here, I might have really been saved from a lot of really bad stuff that happened to me growing up. And so that's why education and awareness for me is so important. So that if you have those vulnerabilities, or if you've experienced some things, we want to create a safe place and an educated place for you to step forward and talk about it. Going back to why I do this work is because I look back now, around the time that I started running away and even prior to that. I have a little pamphlet that's going to be available for you guys to take home, and it's called Red Flags. And it's how to identify a pimp and trafficker, and then how to identify a victim. I exhibited almost every single red flag that you could have as somebody who was vulnerable and involved in a very unsafe relationship and situation at 13 years old. And if somebody would have identified me, if somebody would have been able to go to a teacher or the police or my mom or somebody and say, hey, something's not right here, I might have really been saved from a lot of really bad stuff that happened to me growing up. And so that's why education and awareness for me is so important. So that if you have those vulnerabilities, or if you've experienced some things, we want to create a safe place and an educated place for you to step forward and talk about it. I can tell you,